So today we're going to continue our work with inequalities, but we're going to start with the warm-up first. Please go ahead and try the warm-up. That is a negative 1.5 or a plus negative 1.5 in that first problem. My inequality symbol just shifted over a little bit. So go ahead and double check and see if 4 is a solution, and then check the equation below. So now that you've had a chance to do these, forgot to switch to my writing tool. So we're going to do 2 times 4 plus negative 1.5 needs to be greater than or equal to 6. 8 plus negative 1.5 negative needs to be greater than or equal to 6. 8 plus negative 1.5 is positive 6.5. That is in fact greater than or equal to 6. So yes, 4 is in fact a solution. The second one is just a multi-step equation. So we're going to add negative 8 to each side. So f over 4 will equal negative 1. To undo division, we're going to multiply each side by 4. So f will equal negative 4. If you need help with the check, I'm not going to go over the check right now for that second problem, but if you do need help with the check, as always, please come see me individually during Flex or RAP or SSR or whenever you have a chance. So today we're going to look at multi-step inequalities, 2-step, 3-step inequalities, and then we're going to look at these things known as compound inequalities. And if you're making a compound, or you think of the word compound itself, it's putting many things together. So compound inequalities are actually 2 inequalities that are kind of smushed together. And you'll see that when we get there. So we're going to start with our multi-step first. So we're going to distribute through our parentheses first and change to plus the opposite. So negative 0.6x plus, and the 2 negatives will cancel out and give me 3 equaling 15. The 3 moves first. I'm going to add negative 3 to each side. So negative 0.6x will equal 12. Not equal. That is a common mistake. You're just so used to putting equal signs, and I am as well. But it actually needs to be a less than or equal to sign. I'm going to divide each side by 0.6. Because I divided by a negative number, that sign is going to flip from less than to greater than now. And 12 divided by negative 0.6 will give me negative 20. Number 2, again, I'm going to go plus the opposite, making it negative 5. So I'm going to add 5 to each side. So 2x will equal 28. Divide each side by 2. X will be less than or equal to 14. Did you notice in the middle that I did it again? I switched to my equal sign instead of keeping it my less than or equal to. So I need to go back and change that. Again, very common mistake. So now it's a less than or equal to instead of an equal sign. These for you to try. So I want you to go ahead and try these 3 on your own, and then we will talk about the answers. So looking at that first one, I'm going to move the 5 first by adding negative 5 to each side. And that will leave me with negative 6y being less than or equal to negative 21. Divide each side by a negative 6. Yes, you get a decimal. It is okay. It is more important that you remember that since you divided by a negative 6, that sign needs to flip to greater than or equal to. And those 2 negatives will cancel out and give me a positive 3.5. Number 4, I'm going to multiply each side by the reciprocal of 1/4, which is 4. You could also just distribute the 1/4 through the parentheses. It's entirely up to you and your comfort level with fractions. But p plus -12 is going to be greater than -8. Because I multiplied each side by a +4, I don't have to flip that sign. So now I'm going to add 12 to each side. Oh, it's a -1/4. So that's a -4, so that's a +8. I couldn't see my negative. And because we multiplied each side by a -4, that sign does need to flip to less than. So p is going to be less than 20. Last problem, a little bit more than a 2-step problem, but we can still handle it. I'm going to move the 2x first by adding -2x to each side. So that's going to give me 4x plus -7 equaling 17. To get rid of the -7, I'm going to add +7 to each side. So 4x, I did it again. This needs to be greater than 24. Divide each side by 4 because we're dividing by a +4. X just needs to be greater than 6. So over here real quick, I'm just going to review graphing your solutions. We're going to graph the solutions to the last 5 problems. So the first problem, we ended up with a solution of greater than or equal to -20. So again, I'm going to cross out my -10 and make that -20. Because it is greater than or equal to, it is going to be a closed in dot. And x needs to be greater than or larger, so we're going to be heading towards the right. In the second problem, we looked at x being less than or equal to 14. Cross out my 10, make it 14. It's going to be a closed in dot again because it is less than or equal to. X needs to be less than or smaller than, so my line is going to go to the left. In problem 3, we ended up with y greater than 3.5. So we estimate where 3.5 would be. It is a closed in dot. Y needs to be larger, so we're headed towards the right. Number 4, p is less than 20 because we had to flip that sign around. Open dot at 20, p needs to be smaller, so we're going to the left. X needs to be greater than 6, open dot at 6, x needs to be larger, so we're headed towards the right. So just like when we were solving equations and we had weird answers such as no solution or all real numbers, we can actually have those with inequalities as well. And the 2 statements are exactly like equations, either no solution or all real numbers. So just like always, we're going to solve the problem down. I'm going to distribute through my parenthesis. So 14x plus 5 is less than 14x plus -21. I'm going to move my variable from the right to the left by adding the opposite. So I'm going to add -14x to each side. And 5 needs to be less than -21. 5 is not less than -21. Hopefully you all understand that. That is a false statement. Because it is a false statement, we go with no solution. Looking at the second problem, I am again going to distribute through my parentheses. So 12x plus -1 is greater than 12x plus -6. I'm going to add -12x to each side. My x's will cancel, and I end up with -1 being greater than -6. the value of negative 1 is in fact greater than the value of negative 6. So this is a true statement, so we're going to go with all real numbers. I have 2 of these for you to try for me, please. And you're either going to get no solution or all real numbers. Oopsie. So 5m plus 25 needs to be greater than 5m plus 17. We're going to add negative 5m to each side. I think my writing is getting sloppier as I go along. And we end up with 25 being less than 17. 25 is in fact less than 17. I'm sorry, 25 is not less than 17. So that is a false statement, so it is no solution. Second problem, plus negative 8x is less than negative 8x plus positive 4. We're going to add 8x to each side. 1 needs to be less than 4. 1 in fact is less than 4. So we're going to go with all real numbers. So those 3 examples took care of our multi-step inequalities. Now we're going to look at these things called compound inequalities. And if you look at the example I have up here, you'll see how we basically took one inequality, but we have 2 answers, one on either side of it. And all we're going to do is we're going to take that problem and we're going to split it into 2 smaller ones. So 2 is less than x plus 5, and x plus 5 is less than 9. You'll notice, again, I just took it and I split it. Okay, I took that middle piece and wrote it with each of the answers. So I'm going to add negative 5 to each side. Because I'm adding, I don't need to do anything with the sign, so negative 3 is going to be less than x. In my second equation, I'm also going to add negative 5, so x needs to be less than positive 4. Now that we have both pieces, we need to actually merge them back together. So our 2 x's are basically just going to come together and overlap. So negative 3 less than x less than 4. When I go to graph it, just do each piece separately. So x has to be less than 4. So open dot, and we know we're coming this direction. My second one says negative 3 is smaller than x. So we're actually going to have a line that connects the 2 dots. And this is saying that these answers from negative 3 to positive 4, any number in that range would work for the x if we're using the answer of 2 on the left or the answer of 9 on the right. It would work for both sides of that inequality. So I have 3 of these that I want you to try. I don't want you to worry about graphing them right now. I just want you to go ahead and work on solving them. So looking at the first one, so negative 7 is less than x plus negative 5. So I'm going to add positive 5 to each side. Negative 2 is less than x. The second piece is x plus negative 5 needs to be less than 4. So I'm going to add positive 5 to each side. So x has to be less than 9. Putting it back together, negative 2 less than x less than positive 9. Number 2, negative 7 less than negative 1z plus negative 1. I'm going to add 1 to each side. Negative 6 is less than negative 1z. I need to divide each side by a negative 1. Notice because we're dividing by a -1, that sign is going to flip, and we're going to get 6 being greater than z. The other half, -1z plus -1, needs to be less than 3. I'm going to add +1 to each side, just like I did before. -1z will be less than 4. Divide each side by a -1. And -1. Because that sign needs to flip, z will be greater than -4. Putting my two answers together, 6 will be greater than z, which is greater than -4. Typically, this answer is perfectly correct. You would get full credit for it. But traditionally, we like the smaller of the two values to be on the left-hand side, kind of mimicking a number line. So you would just take this whole problem and flip it over. So -4 less than z less than 6. And either one of those answers would be fine. Last one, 10 less than 2y plus 4. I'm going to add -4 to each side. 6 is less than 2y, divide each side by 2. 3 is less than y. 2y plus 4 less than 24. I'm going to add -4 to each side. So 2y is less than 20, and I divide each side by 2 because I'm running out of room. We end up with y being less than 10. Putting them together, 3 less than y less than 10. There is another type of compound inequality. This one uses the word or, and it's actually really simple because you have each of the equations already separated. So you're just going to solve each one individually. So the first one, 2x plus 3 being less than 9. I'm going to add -3 to each side. 2x needs to be less than 6. Divide each side by 2. X is less than 3. Looking at my second equation, I'm going to add +6 to each side. 3x is less than 18. Divide each side by 3. And x is greater than 6. You stick the word or back between the two. Again, we traditionally like the smaller one on the left-hand side. So we would have x less than 3 or x greater than 6. But it does not make that much of a difference. Now we're going to graph each one. You graph each one separately. X is greater than 6, open dot, going to the right. X needs to be smaller than 3, so open dot, going down. Or actually has a gap in the middle. Or instead of having, when we looked at our other compound inequality, which is actually an and, we just don't put the word and in there. It's actually an and inequality. We ended up with a range of numbers that worked in both. This time we're ending up with this range, this middle piece in between the two dots. And these are the only answers that would not work in the equations. So instead of having the group that does work, now we're actually focusing on the group that does not work. So now I have 2 of these for you to try. So go ahead, try them on your own, and then we'll go over them. Do not worry about having to graph them at this point. So in this first one, I'm going to add -1 to each side. So 3h is less than -6. Divide each side by 3. H is less than -2. I'm going to add +5 to each side. So 2h is greater than 12. Divide each side by 2. H is greater than 6. Final answer, h is less than -2 or h is greater than 6. In the last one, I'm going to add -1 to each side. So So 4c is less than negative 2. No, that's not right. Since they're both negative, I'm going to add them together. I'm losing my mind. And we get negative 4. Divide each side by a positive 4. Because the number we divided by was a positive, even though my answer is negative, we're not going to flip that sign. Negative 3, so I'm going to add positive 3 to each side. 5c is going to be greater than 20. Divide each side by 5. And we get c being greater than 4. We stick an or in between the two answers, and we are good to go. Two more problems to look at, both of them being word problems. We're going to work through both of them together. So I can work at most 24 hours per week. So the most I can work is 24 hours. So whatever I'm working has to be less than that 24 hours per week. So far this week I have worked 7 hours, plus each of the shifts left to work is 4 hours long. So 4 hours times however many shifts I want to work, plus the 7 hours I already did, that number has to be smaller than 24. So I'm going to add negative 7 to each side. For x less than or equal to 17, divide each side by 4. And you actually get x being less than or equal to 4.25. Always make sure you read the question that is being asked of you. It wants to know how many full shifts she can work. Well, 4.25. She can't work 5 full shifts, so she'll be over. So she can only work 4 full shifts, is the actual final answer. And this is where they try to trick you on the Keystone exam and the PSSA, because multiple choice question, that 4.25 is going to be one of your 4 answers. And a lot of you are going to be, okay, 4.25, got that answer's listed, that must be the right one, you circle it and you move on. Whereas they're really looking for the full shift amount. So please make sure that you read those problems as carefully as you. Nope. The last one we're looking at, we're saving money for a summer camp that costs $1,800. So we need at least $1,800. We can have more than $1,800. We can save as much money as we want. But we have to make sure that we at least have that total of $1,800. I've saved $500 so far. Plus I have 14 more weeks. I need to figure out what I need to save each week. So I'm going to add negative 500 to each side. Sorry, this thing's acting up with me. I'm going to add negative 500 to each side. And I get 14x being greater than or equal to 1,300. Divide each side by 14. And x needs to be greater than or equal to 92.86. So he needs to save at least $92.86 each week. Make sure you put your label. But he can certainly save more than that. Again, your homework's going to be a worksheet. If you don't have the worksheet in front of you, you should be able to find it off my website or off the team calendar. And as always, if you need help with anything, please come see me during Flex. That is what I am here for.